Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have my friends together here with me today. We are going to be talking about communication. I'm with Jess Carey and Noelle Rhodes.
Hey.
Hi.
We are actually launching a 4-part series on communication, about open, honest communication, what it has to do with building a stronger family, ways that we can communicate, ways to navigate difficult conversations and connect with our kids. Because I feel like this was a really important topic to tackle, but like take a deep dive into, because it really is the foundation of all of our relationships, including our family relationships. And so I'm excited to have you guys here with me today to give me your thoughts on the topic. And also, we want to make sure in every episode that we're sharing real life examples of what's worked for us, what hasn't worked for us, what it's been like to be on this journey to improve the communication within our families. I'm going to jump right in, and I want us to talk about the role of communication in family dynamics. And so the habits that we get into on a regular basis, the way we communicate with one another really does shape our family's culture and its overall health. And so I think that the first thing that we can do when it comes to communication is really take the time to identify what is good communication and what is bad communication. So I'm going to start us off with an example of what is good communication. So good communication helps family members understand each other's perspectives and thoughts. Now, this is something that is important to me, because I personally have gotten into a habit where I know what's going on in my children's lives, but I don't necessarily know what they're thinking or feeling about these ups and downs that they're going through. And so this has been something that I've been working on, because there's more to relationship than just who's doing what, who's going where, what's going on in your life.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Good communication also promotes intimacy and trust, which, I mean, when you think about, your friend says that they just met somebody and they're talking to somebody and they're getting to know each other, it sort of means they're growing in intimacy. You really can't be close to somebody that you're not talking to. And so, what's going to create space for more communication is good communication. Bad communication often leads to breakups or breakdowns, or people just straight up withdrawing. But good communication kind of opens the door for you to show who you are, and kind of, to your point, Kimberly, share your feelings and your thoughts about stuff. And as that exchange happens over time, you build trust. So good communication builds trust and intimacy.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like when you have intimacy, when you have trust, then you feel more compelled. And this is another pillar of good communication, is you can share openly and honestly. You can be vulnerable in that relationship. And the great thing about that is the more open and honest that you can be, especially about like what you're feeling, what problems you're facing as a family, then you're able to help each other solve problems. You're able to make collective decisions that meet more of the needs of the family. Like if you don't know that someone's struggling with a certain circumstance or person even, then it's really hard to like come together and solve that problem. So I love that. It's like trust, go deep, be open, be vulnerable. All of these things are actually really hard to do, I think, even within the family context. So I'm glad we're talking about this today.
Yeah. Well, think about the people that we're excited to see. Those are people that we typically will probably have great communication with. They're people that we feel safe around. They're people that we trust. They're people that we go deeper than surface level conversation with. And we don't even have to know the tenets of good conversation to know, wow, I'm really looking forward to spending time with that person. It's likely that you have some good communication in place in those relationships.
Yeah. And I like what Noelle said too. It's like the breakdown of good communication leads to, distance. It leads to separation. And it's like when you have that, when you break trust, and I think that the communication breakdown is like it's the first step in breaking trust with someone. It's like, oh, you miscommunicated. You said something that someone took a certain way, even if you didn't even intend it to be that way, then there's trust broken. And now you have a gap to fill. And it's much harder to come back from that or to reset communication after a break than it is to just, maintain healthy, open communication all along.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
When you have poor communication, you don't know how to understand each other's needs, right? And I've found in relationships when I can think of a few people, sometimes my spouse, when we don't understand each other's needs, it leads to frustration, and then it leads to anger and resentment. And over time, if you continue in these poor patterns of communicating with one another, you're going to start to have buildup. And I think that it does take humility, and it probably even takes a little bit of practice for us to actually be able to communicate what we need in our relationship, what we need in a particular season, what we even need out of our relationship with that other person.
I think this series is so important as we're covering good communication and bad communication or poor communication, because one of the pillars that you teach, Kimberly, is about family culture and becoming intentional about building a healthy, happy family culture. And it's interesting, if you were to look at possibly getting a job at Netflix, they make you read about their culture. And there's a whole humongous section that Netflix puts out just about communication and how to have good communication at Netflix. And there's specific steps and there's a whole system in place. Why? Because good communication is going to lead to good work and a good experience for people. Bad communication is going to lead to not being productive, time wasting, money wasting, and ultimately a bad experience at work. So, we're totally not surprised that these humongous, super successful companies have communication policies in place and a communication culture that they're actively talking about and teaching. We don't necessarily do this as families, and then we're going, well, we have bad communication. Well, maybe it's because we need to dissect this and talk about it and decide what would be the best communication style and system for our own families.
Yeah. And piggybacking what I said earlier, if you have tension in a relationship, it may be because your communication skills aren't great. If you're dreading spending time with somebody, and you're dreading working with them, quite frankly, it may be because you're not communicating well.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I love that it's like, these corporate entities understand that this is like the foundation of a healthy work environment. And yet, we go home with babies and they don't send you with like like, here's your manual, how you need to talk to this kid, especially as they start to communicate or sometimes not communicate. But I think that brings up this idea of like, what do we face specifically within the family context of, what are the breakdowns of communication in a family? Because we don't get that manual,
Yeah.
And I think, one of them is like we avoid, or at least in our family, sometimes we avoid difficult conversations because they are hard. And, you don't want to address a very sensitive topic or a difficult topic because you don't want to rock the boat. You kind of want to just like, oh, I know I probably need to have this conversation because it's still bothering me, or I can see that it's starting to break down. But I think that, those closest to you, I think you're very sensitive to hurting their feelings.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that breaks down. It's like we avoid some of the trickier topics for longer periods of time sometimes.
Right. Which unfortunately does give the door open to foster resentment and bitterness over time. Like avoiding might seem like a really good short-term solution, and it might keep the peace. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be that elephant in the room.
Absolutely.
It's such a good point that you're bringing up, Jess, because when we avoid, we have to assume then what the other person's thinking because we haven't asked them.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And
come on, Noelle, that's so good.
As a human, though, unfortunately, we tend to assume the negative.
Yes.
So like we're assuming that this person has all these feelings and thoughts that are negative or polar opposite to what we're thinking. And then we're walking around with that assumption and then acting upon the assumption, even how we treat them or what we're saying. And so avoiding those difficult conversations, it's like it doesn't take you to any good place. It just takes you farther away from where you need to be. So that's a really important point that you bring up.
I love that. With that whole thing of assumptions, it's like, my husband, has always been like a digital guy, right? He's like an early adopter of all things technology, and he just gets super pumped about it. And I can do that, like, especially when he's just constantly on his technology or his device. And now my kids are teens, so I'm dealing with that with them. And I can feel very much like isolated, ignored,
Yeah.
that they're not interested in what I have to say. Like I'll tell them about my day and I'm like really excited. Something great happened, and I'm like, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened today. And I'm in the middle of my conversation and then I see this and, the thumbs on the freaking black screen and I want to lose it. Like, it's just so frustrating. And yet it's like, I'm assuming that they're uninterested or that they don't care. And at the end of the day, it might just be that they got momentarily distracted. And I need to be like, hey, can you just like look at me for a minute while I finish this story? And then you can go back to whatever is so important, like your online gaming thing. My husband
Right.
doesn't do that, but my son does. So it's like, I don't care. Can we just pause game on the pinball and just have a conversation with mom first? So that's another breakdown, at least in our communication at home these days, that I have to fight with.
Yeah, sometimes I'll say, if they're on their phone, I'll be like, I'll just wait till you're done when you're ready. And then they're like, oh. They stop what they're doing.
Kim, I'm glad they do that. They don't just like let you like age
Okay,
out
you can
over
wait.
in the corner.
But I think that leads us to another common obstacle is the lack of active listening, like the actual lack of the skill, right? So we're going to do a deep dive into active listening. We're going to dedicate a whole podcast episode to it. But this idea that family members can't truly listen to one another if they actually don't know how. And there's certain skills that help you to be an active, engaged listener. And, my husband likes to tell me, I know what you're saying. I'm already on the next step, or, I got this, while he's looking at something else. I'm like, no, I mean, you could be as smart as you think you are. You're not listening. And it doesn't make me feel seen or heard. And so I think it's for us, it's worth a deep dive into what are some basic skills of what they look like. And so if you don't have those skills, how do you apply them?
Yeah, that's going to be an important episode, I think.
Yeah. I mean, everybody could be, we can all improve in our listening skills.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think a very common communication challenge that definitely rears its ugly head as soon as you get married or move in with somebody is conflicting communication styles.
Oh,
yeah. I think we all have grown up in certain kinds of households, and those households had certain kinds of communication styles. Some of them were yellers, some of them were silent treatment people, some of them were very direct, others beat around the bush. And so there's that conflicting communication style that comes from just what you've inherited, but also personality. There's personality types that they are only going to say what they think you want to hear. They're not necessarily going to share what's in their heart. And then there's personality types who will tell you what they think, even if you don't want to hear it. So that's a challenge. It is a challenge, and it's an important thing to work through as a family, and even cultivate a healthy family communication style, so that what your kids are bringing into their families as they grow up is good and solid foundation for them to work off of. So I know we've struggled with this in our family for sure, because I'm Italian American. So I don't have to say much more than that, but my communication style was strong.
Yeah. But you know what? It's like, it is really interesting. Like you said, we need to equip our kids, not just to like be successful adults, but to be able to have successful relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, this even goes into their friendships. Like, how do they communicate with friends? My daughter, she's a teenager, she's in high school. So she's dealing with all kinds of friendship dynamics, and she's coming to me like, Mom, what do I say in this circumstance? So even helping our children have language and have a way to present that is, hopefully not offensive, but still honest and vulnerable, So I don't know. And then we have to deal with the fallout sometimes whenever other children, boyfriends, girlfriends, etc., don't don't have healthy communication, they may respond in a way that is really hurtful. And then you have to
yeah.
deal with that. Like, oh, we have a healthy communication in our own home, or we've tried to establish that. And yet miscommunication, poor communication can be really hurtful to people. And I think that's important to recognize as well.
So true.
Yeah, that's
So
a good
true.
lesson for our kids to remind them. So their poor communication skills is not, it typically has nothing to do with you. Like, don't take it personally.
Yes.
They're probably doing
Right.
this in every relationship that they're in. They don't know how to cope. They don't know how to verbalize what they're feeling or thinking.
Yeah.
And, you know, yes, we can come alongside them, encourage them, be a friend to them, but like at some point we have to realize this isn't about us. This is sometimes about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Right.
So true.
And allowing, like, I think another thing is like when you're dealing with emotions. So, you know, that person's mad at me, and then that like devastates you, right? You've said something, you've been straightforward or whatever, and then they're angry. And allowing that person to process their emotion before they're pressed to communicate. I think that's a really good lesson in good communication. It's like allowing that emotional processing time before you're like, I need a verbal response and I need things to be better. You know, it's like sometimes you just have to allow a little bit of the frustration, the anger, you know, kind of like settle a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, underlying causes of these challenges that we see in families sometimes have to do with past traumas or past histories. You know, maybe your communication, like my communication with my own father was really disruptive for about 4 years. I shouldn't say disruptive, it was non-existent. And I made a decision not to sort of be with my dad. And it was a mistake. It's probably one of my biggest regrets in life, but that created a significant breakdown in my ability to communicate with men.
Wow.
And so I had this massive disconnect, you know, because I did not have a healthy example that was, you know, readily available in my family. But I think those are the types of things sometimes that inform our future communication is our past traumas.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind as we're looking to shift to better communication in our homes. You know, one of the things that I think we need to be aware of is having self-awareness and understanding the way you communicate. That could prevent you from improving the communication of your home if you're not self-aware of your habits and things that you're doing. It's extremely difficult to course correct or change communication when you're not self-aware, when you have this blind spot and you're saying, I communicate perfectly. And if, you know, you can just say the right words, we'll be fine. Some humility has to come into play.
Oh goodness. When you're like having the last word, I'm like, yep, I have been in conversations like that.
You're like, just give it to me. Just let me,
like,
just.
No, just keep your mouth shut. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that has to be said, especially as we're raising our kids, is there is a lack of emotional intelligence among this younger generation.
Oh,
and I
my
don't mean that
goodness.
in a disrespectful way. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we were locked down for a little bit.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
we're in our
That's
homes,
a good point.
and we were doing a lot of our communication via digital, you know, whether it was Zoom or text or social media, and our children missed out on some of those opportunities they would have had of practicing communication skills on the playground, in the classroom with the teacher, in real time, where you're sharing the same, you know, air kind of thing. And so there is a little bit of a lack of emotional intelligence. And that's not to say that that can't be fixed or improved upon, but I do think that we're a little bit behind because we were all stuck in our homes. And I see that, you know, and I see that even, you know, my kids are teenagers, but I see there's certain things I'm like, gosh, do people know how to work this out by now? Like,
Right.
why are you getting stuck on here? But it's like they never got a chance
Right.
iron out those things or practice those things with their peers or even their teachers. Like the idea of having to ask a teacher a question is like scary. It's like frightening.
Yeah. Oh
But
my
you
goodness. What a
haven't
good point, Noelle.
they didn't have the opportunity to be like in class going, I don't understand this, you know?
Right.
And So I think there's something to say about that, we have to just be aware as a culture that we're catching up a little bit still in that area.
Yeah, to piggyback on that too, it's like even once we came back to like we could gather in person, we still were all masked up. So we were getting a filtered version of full human communication. It's
Yeah.
like your tone is muffled at
Yep.
best. And you feel yourself like screaming through the mask, like I said,
Yeah. It was just easier to say nothing, right? And so you got used to I got used to communicating with people with the least amount of words as possible.
Yeah.
Yes. And then
Yeah.
like, of course, facial expressions,
Mm.
they share, it's like you share an entire novel with one look,
Right.
and every child knows it because they see the mom eyes and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm in trouble. And all it took was that one look,
Yeah.
And I think that that's the other aspect of the whole like lockdown scenario, that we're relearning how to read other human beings and where they're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it
when you're-
definitely would carry, I think that would definitely put COVID and everything we went through with the pandemic into like the trauma bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It's legit real trauma people have experienced, and especially kids not knowing how to, and really needing them to be coached and led back to healthy communication.
Yeah.
Reality is too, when you're born, you're not born with effective communication skills. You know what I mean? You're born with no language. You're
Mhm.
only born with the ability to kind of read facial expressions and things like that. But your whole entire childhood is a beautiful place to grow those skills. Unfortunately, like, that's not always sort of a part of the educational curriculum. Is like, let's teach you how to have effective communication with one another. It's not necessarily
Mhm.
like that. It's a little bit more organic, but I do think as parents, what an opportunity, from you're dealing with a 2-year-old that's throwing a tantrum. Well, what a great opportunity to help them understand how to express disappointment without
Mhm.
stuffing it inside, still remaining vulnerable, but not hurting anybody.
Right.
I mean, so I think it's just, that's why I appreciate this podcast so much, because it's really talking about these things that are everyday occurrences, but making them intentional
Right.
and utilizing as a way to guide our kids to be amazing human beings that they're meant to be.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that.
So do you guys have any real life examples or stories you want to share with us about how good communication or bad communication has defined our family? This is where we get real and tell you the real stuff.
Well, I'll just be really wide open and vulnerable. I feel like, my daughter and I have had a communication breakdown as of late. And I'm narrowing down like where and why and how that sort of happened potentially. But I would say for months, I've been trying to, kind of come around the corner like, hey, what did I do to make you so upset that you never want to spend any time with me, And some of it, I think, is just the natural stage of life that she's in. Like she's becoming independent and, she doesn't want to be holed up with mom all afternoon. And so I get that. So we've had some really challenging conversations, my husband and I both, because fortunately he felt the same way. Like he kind of had a similar experience. Like you come home, you say, hi, mom, hi, dad, up to your room, close the door, and you're there until you are hungry, essentially. And it was like, that's not really a relationship. We don't feel valued as your parents. We don't feel like you want to have any kind of relationship with us. And we've had those conversations with her and she's like, it's not that at all. And it's like, well, let me just ask you. And I gave her a visual example of what it was like being in the room with her. I said, okay, you're asking mom, hey mom, what's for dinner? And I'm on my phone just like this, no response. I don't bother to look up. I'm just doing my thing. And you say, hey mom, still no response. You say, hey mom, and I get up from the table as though you have said nothing and walk upstairs to my bedroom without actually answering you. And I said, how would that make you feel? Does it make you feel valued? Like I care about what you have to say or that
Right.
I want to be in relationship with you? And she's like, no. And I said, yeah. I said, mom and dad are kind of hurt. Our feelings are hurt because this is what we've seen. And so since that deep conversation, things have improved, but it's still like, it's a work in progress. And it was really hard to paint that picture
Mm,
because I didn't want her to feel bad. I didn't want her to be upset that we were
right.
like, you don't spend any time with us, like I'm a big kid. I should be able to handle that. But at the same
Right.
time, she needed to know that that's how we were feeling.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow,
I
that
had,
was hard. That had
yeah,
to be hard.
yeah.
Yeah. Rough
Mm,
raising teens.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's an
I mean, I think a
adventure.
big breakthrough that we had with my girls, and this isn't necessarily the story I want to share, but about what you're saying is when I just was super vulnerable and told them how it made me feel, and I didn't want to do that. Like you said, like I wanted to be the strong mom and rolls off my back. And I read the books. I know what you're going through, but I was like, this hurt my feelings, and
Yeah.
doing that, I'm sure was amazing and super pivotal for you. So
Mm,
that's something
yeah.
that I've tried to learn how to do because that does not come naturally to me
Mm.
for sure. But one thing that I wanted to share was, as you were talking about, because I think we all, you're preteen or teen, Noelle? You're teen. You're there, right?
I have 2 teens,
Two teens.
full
Yeah.
teens.
The
And
two teen mamas over here.
yeah. And so all of this, no matter how old your child is, it can definitely be applied. But like as I'm in those years and as you were talking, it reminded me about my children, how sometimes, yes, they pull away, they withdraw, they do the come home from school thing, go to their room. I'm sure little kids do this in their own way as well, especially if you have introverted children. And I have in the past, so this is a misstep on my part, but also a way that I'm trying to improve, is that I've kind of backed off because I wanted to give them space. But sometimes that can be
Mm,
misinterpreted as I'm not interested anymore, or
yeah.
like I think our children need us to continue to pursue them and to continue to show up and communicate them with them in a way that's authentic to us and show up as who we want to
Yeah.
be and the mom we want to be. And, I find myself like being like, oh, if I go up there, is she going to be annoyed? Like I go through all those
Yeah.
things and I have to make sure that I don't let that prevent me from engaging with her. Like, right. I think I'm doing the right thing by giving her space and giving her privacy and leaving her alone. And, but is that a self-protective action or is that a loving action? And so what are my motives there? And oftentimes it's trying to like, I just don't want her to be mad at me. Like, I don't, and so
I just don't want
really,
to deal with the drama
I know.
today. That's the real answer. I don't want to deal with it.
I just want to tell her I love her. But that continual pursuit, like choosing how you want to show up and how you want to communicate with your family. And don't be afraid to go there. And don't be afraid to share that because you're worried about their reaction, but be really intentional
Yeah.
about your, reaction, how you act and how you behave and how you communicate, because I think it's sowing seeds and it shows them how to communicate, even when the person they're communicating with is not reciprocating.
Yeah. I think that's so good to just like remind ourselves as parents to continue to pursue communication with your children. Because it is like when they're in a season or
Yeah.
a stage of life where communication gets difficult or disjointed, then it's easy to just kind of like, it's easier for me not to say anything.
Yeah.
Silence is easier than the hard conversation. And it's like, don't take the easy way out, because ultimately you want your child to find you as a safe space that they can share, the hard in their own life. So
Yeah.
if you're not willing to like go to the hard place, then they don't have a ready-made person, right? A ready-made relationship to share those types of things. And so that was good encouragement for me, Kimberly. I'm like, okay, keep going, keep asking questions.
Keep going. I mean,
even if she thinks you're nosy and like,
Yes.
she's like, Mom,
Yeah.
stop asking me these
Yes.
questions.
yeah. I mean, I would hate for my children to look back and be like, oh, those were the silent years. Mom and dad left me alone. Like,
Wow.
and then you
Yeah.
can't go. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
yeah, I
good.
could go like, well, you wanted me to, but what does that get you? That gets you, a gap and a broken down relationship and
Yeah.
communication. And so let's not let
Yeah.
that happen.
So good. So, I mean, my experience has been a little bit different than you guys because my oldest child had language difficulty. He has a hearing loss. So much earlier on, it was like we just became obsessed with how to communicate with our child. How can we create space for him? So I was like studying every single thing. So I feel like, for me, it was out of a place of like desperation. I mean, my one thing I could say to parents is just, and echoing what you're saying, is don't give up and try whatever you need to try. I mean, there was at one point for us, because he had a hearing loss, we were learning ASL, another time we did so many techniques, so many things. And when it stopped working, we tried something else, but we just never stopped trying. And I think when someone is trying to get a hold of you and talk to you, right, sometimes you're a little annoyed, but you're also like, oh, well, they kind of like me, they want to get to know me, they care about me. And so I think for our kids, it's like, yeah, mom and dad are always asking me a million questions, but if we stopped asking questions, just like you said, Kimberly, that communicates that we just don't care. And that's not true. We're saying, oh, we're like giving them space, but I think it's okay. Just keep going at it and do whatever we can to continue to blaze a path of good communication. It's important. And for me, like, my personal story would be like, I'm usually, I was thinking about how like I tend to struggle with assuming in the negative when it comes to my husband, because he's not necessarily someone that has a lot to say, but when he does have something to say, he's direct about it. And I remember the other day, I was like, oh, got real quiet. And he's like, why did you like stop talking? And I said, I just felt like I was talking too much. I didn't want to annoy you. And he's like, why did you assume that I was annoying you? And I'm like, well, you weren't saying anything. He's like, why didn't you ask me if I'm annoying, And I think that just goes to show. Yeah. I mean, this is like,
that's amazing.
Real life, but it's true. Like, we're modeling that to our kids too.
Yeah.
That, oh, mom got quiet. Why? Because she thinks dad's annoyed with her, but dad never said that. Like, it's silly little things like that. But at any point in your life, you can improve your communication and ultimately improve your relationships. And that's a great, beautiful gift that we get to have.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned, sorry, Kimberly, go ahead. I always interrupt you. This is like my habit. Okay, go ahead. You have some wisdom. I'm going to listen to it.
No, I was just thinking a couple things. Like when you were talking about, instead of stop asking questions, maybe you can shift the questions. Like maybe it's not a matter of communicating less or even sometimes communicating more. Maybe it's just changing the way you communicate and what it is you're communicating about. And so that's just a reminder to me to shift, like stop asking the same old questions.
Right. Yeah.
But I was just wondering, you guys must be really good at eye contact in your home. Is that true? Or is that a stereotype? Like, is that me making assumptions? Like,
yes.
Because that is not something we're good at.
No, it is, because just as an interesting example, when we're at the pool, my son cannot wear his hearing aids. So he's completely relying on my facial expressions to guide him. When he was younger, not so much as older, but like if I had, if you're listening to this podcast, you can't see my face, but if I'm like, he knew he was too deep. Like he had to come back. It was unsafe, So he really relied, and he's to this day. I mean, this is
just saying, you guys should watch this. You should watch it.
It'll be on YouTube. You can watch it.
Yeah, I mean, he had to rely on that, and even to this day, he still has a speech therapist, and the reason why, and he would tell you this, is because he feels that communication is very important for his relationship. So we have someone come just to work on conversational speech for him, because he suffered from a language deficit, and the poor speech therapist was sick, and his doctor said he couldn't come without wearing a mask, and I said, just don't come at all, because my son has to see your face, to read your lips, to read the context of what you're saying, to actually know what you're asking him or talking to him about. So, going back to that point of we were all masked, we lost context in our communication. It's really interesting to think about that. So yeah, we do have we have good eye contact for sure.
I had so many things to say, but just on that, I was thinking, text messaging has become a very common way to communicate.
Yeah.
But how much of the human expression is lost in simply a text message? And that's
So
why
much.
I oftentimes I will just pick up the phone, especially if it's a harder conversation or it's a heavier conversation, right?
Right.
Someone is hurting, they've just basically dropped a bomb on your lap and is like, "Hey, this happened in my life today." And you're like, "Wait, what?" That is not the time to respond, "Oh, sorry."
Yeah.
It's the time to pick up the phone, the actual phone, so that they can at least hear your voice,
Mm,
or even FaceTime or whatever it is. It's like, give people the fullest expression of your compassion
mm,
when you can.
yeah, that's
Mhm.
good.
So, like, especially with
Yeah.
the difficult conversations, you got to give them that.
There's no amount of emojis in the world that's going to communicate tone. There's just not that many. There's just not.
I do
I mean, they're
use
trying though
emojis
now,
to
Al. They're
communicate.
trying.
I do feel like that's the extra, like, here you go, so you know what I really mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
My daughter always tells me that I misuse emojis. I misuse, the like hold and press, like heart or thumbs up or exclamation point.
Yeah.
She's like, she goes, "Mom, you're the only generation that uses that. You know that, right?" And I'm like, "I don't care." I said, "It helps me express myself. I'm going to use it.
Exactly.
That's it."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right.
Good.
So,
I'm learning.
yeah, we're all learning.
Mhm.
One resource that I wanted to share for great overall communication, I'm
Mm.
sure I mentioned this last season on the podcast, Emotionally Healthy Relationships Day by Day. Well, actually, there's a 40-day journal, but then there's also a workbook. It's by Peter Scazzaro. And it's just step by step, different parts of communication. Conflict resolution is
Mm.
definitely in there, but he really like goes down to basics and says how you can simply communicate what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what's on your mind, your expectations. And so I found that to be really helpful. I'm looking forward to going through it once again, because the first time you read it, it's sort of an assault on like the way you're so used to doing things, and why should I have to do all that?
Right.
A lot of people, I know that I struggled and my husband struggled with like, why do I have to go through all the steps? Like, but you do, like,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
need to create new habits of the way you communicate. And it doesn't have to be a script, but you can start with the script and then eventually
Right.
it'll become comfortable and eventually you'll say it in your own way. But there are principles out there that govern good conversation and bad conversation. So I feel like Emotionally Healthy Relationships was a really good workbook. I think if once you buy the workbook, you get access to the videos, and they're really short videos to watch while you're going through it. But I found that to be a
Sounds good.
really good resource.
Sounds
So
great.
Kimberly, just for, I mean, because I think this is something that would be very, very helpful.
Mhm.
Did you do that with your family? Did you go through that with your husband? Like, how did that look in your
Mm.
dynamic?
Yeah. So we did it with a small group at church over Zoom, which
Okay.
again,
Okay.
probably not the best way. It's not my favorite way. We should have,
Yeah.
like, our pastors are in New York City. We're in New Jersey. Like, I get why we did it. But
Okay.
probably a better experience to do in a person. But going back to what we're talking about, like, I think it's more effective if you're in person having these conversations. But it was me and my husband. We'd watched the Zoom. Our pastors facilitated like some breakout rooms to talk a little bit about what we talked about. And then they gave us the opportunity to actually like walk through the exercises, which I loved because if my husband and I had did this on our own, we would have been like, oh yeah, that's cool. And we would have turned the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah.
Like, so he
Yeah.
actually got
Good.
into like he actually had us all like get into FaceTime breakout group, like breakout from the breakout groups, and facilitated, okay, let's just go through this exercise. And you're like, really? I need to say that? That sounds weird. So we did thankfully have somebody else facilitating it, and we were able to go through it. But I went through it with my
That's
husband.
good.
My children were in the other room and they thought it was just funny. They just were like,
Oh, I'm sure. Can't imagine.
But then interestingly enough, when I went to my daughter's church down in college, they were offering it. And my daughter's boyfriend was here at the time we were doing it. And so he like nudged her. He's like, yeah, we should do that. She's like, yeah, that's okay.
Wow. That's a good boyfriend. You're like,
I
yeah,
know.
boyfriend.
I know. She's like,
Keep that
I'm
guy
not ready for
close.
that. I know. Just the sheer fact that like, somebody young knows that they need to get better
Yeah.
skills is
Absolutely.
really,
good.
really inspiring and really helpful.
That's good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up, but do we have any last takeaways or things that you guys want to share?
It's never too late to improve your communication skills. Never too late. You know, you've grown children.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping to
And
turn
I would
the ship
say,
around here.
Yeah.
I would just say to a listener that is like, yeah, we have a major communication breakdown in our family
Mm,
and feeling quite hopeless. I would just say to that person, just take the first step in trying to improve it, right? Like whether it's this, 40-day journey,
yeah.
sign up for that, or, the next episode, in this communication series is going to give more practical tips, like join
Yeah.
us again and just take the first step. It's like only you can break a toxic communication cycle.
Mm,
Someone has
That's
to
good.
make a choice to do that. So why
Mhm.
can't it be you?
Mhm.
That's so
And that's,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
you could do
Absolutely.
it.
Yes, you can. That's
So
my
I do.
aggressive communication style. Like, you can.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can.
Because you're Italian
I'm Italian
from New Jersey.
from New Jersey.
All right. So I do want to leave you
Can and
guys
you
with
will.
a coaching question. So this is something that you can journal about, you can write down. We will have these questions plus our show notes and the outline that we've shared with you in our Patreon group. And so you can download those. But here's something you can think about. When it comes to communication in your family, what do I want people to know?
Mm,
And what do I want them to feel? And this is really good for me because when I think of some of the ways I've communicated with people, especially family members, I haven't necessarily done it in a way that will get me to the action that I want them to feel. So, do I want to
Mm.
motivate them to action? Do I want them to feel loved? Do I want them to feel seen and heard? What is it that I want my people to feel when they're in conversation with me? Start to think about and be open to, okay, what are some of the ways that I can improve my family through this tool?
It's good.
I love that.
All right. So join us for the next podcast. Like I said in the beginning, this is a 4-part series. We're going to be talking in the next podcast about active listening, followed up by communication tips for parents and kids, and then navigating difficult conversations. So thank you, ladies, for being with us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.